Captain Sarah Chen had always been different at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. At 32, she was one of only 3 female F-16 pilots on the base, and the other pilots never let her forget it. Every morning in the briefing room, she heard the whispers and saw the rolled eyes when she walked in. "Here comes Princess," Major Rick Thompson would mutter to his buddies. Wonder if she cried during today's mission briefing. Sarah kept her face blank and took her seat in the back row. She had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. Her father, a retired Air Force colonel, had taught her that respect was earned through actions, not words. But after 5 years of flawless service and top scores in every evaluation, she was still waiting for that respect to come. The base commander, General Morrison, stood at the front of the room with a grim expression. Behind him, a large screen showed satellite images of Eastern Europe. Dark clouds seemed to hang over everything these days. Tensions with Russia had been building for months, and everyone knew something big was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Morrison began, "we have a situation. Intelligence reports indicate that a rogue Russian general has taken control of a nuclear facility near the border. He's threatening to launch unless his demands are met." The room fell silent. Sarah felt her heart racing, but she kept her breathing steady. This was what they had trained for their entire careers. "We need our best pilots ready for immediate deployment," the general continued. This could be the real thing. As the briefing ended, Sarah stood to leave with the others. That's when she heard Thompson's voice again, louder this time. "I hope they don't send the girl," he said, making sure she could hear. "We need real pilots for this one, not someone who got her wings because of quotas." Sarah stopped walking. Every muscle in her body tensed. She turned slowly to face Thompson, who was smirking at his friends. The room had gone quiet, and everyone was watching. "Is there something you'd like to say to me directly, Major?" Sarah asked, her voice calm and steady. Thompson's smirk widened. "Just saying we need pilots who can handle the pressure. No offense, but when things get rough, some people aren't cut out for it." "I see." Sarah nodded slowly. "And what exactly makes you think I can't handle pressure?" While your Thompson started, then caught himself. He knew he was walking into dangerous territory, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Look, Chen, nothing personal. It's just biology. Women get emotional. They freeze up when things get intense." The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah felt 20 pairs of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond. Part of her wanted to explode, to tell Thompson exactly what she thought of him and his backward opinions, but she had learned control the hard way. Instead, she smiled. "Major Thompson, I appreciate your concern for mission success. Perhaps we should let our flight records speak for themselves." She turned and walked out, leaving Thompson looking foolish in front of his peers. But as Sarah headed to her quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that Thompson's words reflected what many of them really thought. No matter how well she performed, she would always be seen as the weak link. That night, Sarah sat alone in her small apartment off base, staring at a photo of her father in his dress uniform. Colonel David Chen had been one of the first Asian American pilots to reach high command, and he had faced his own share of prejudice along the way. "Prove them wrong with your actions, not your anger," he had always told her. "When the moment comes, be ready." Sarah closed her eyes and wondered if that moment would ever come. She had spent her entire career preparing for combat, but the closest she had come was training exercises and patrol missions. Meanwhile, pilots like Thompson got the high-profile assignments and the COMMENDATIONS. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her best friend and fellow pilot, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, who was stationed in Germany. "Heard about the situation. Over here, stay safe, Sarah. The world's getting scary." Sarah typed back quickly, "Always am. Take care of yourself." But as she put the phone down, Sarah couldn't escape the feeling that everything was about to change. The tension in the briefing room had been different today. This wasn't another training exercise or diplomatic posturing. This felt real. Outside her window, she could see F-16s being prepped on the flight line. Ground crews worked under floodlights, checking weapons systems and fuel loads. The base was preparing for war, and Sarah knew that soon, she might finally get her chance to prove herself. She just hoped she would be ready. When that moment came, the next morning brought an emergency briefing at 050 hours. Sarah arrived early, as always, and took her usual seat in the back. The room filled quickly with tired-looking pilots, clutching coffee cups and wondering what new crisis had developed overnight. General Morrison looked like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect uniform was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "The situation has escalated," he announced without preamble. The rogue Russian general has moved nuclear warheads to launch positions. He's given NATO hours to withdraw all forces from Eastern Europe, or he launches. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. This was no longer a regional conflict, this was the beginning of World War III. We have one chance to stop this, Morrison continued. A surgical strike on the facility before the deadline. It has to be precise, and it has to be perfect. There's no room for error. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was at the moment every fighter pilot dreamed of and feared. The chance to make a real difference, to save lives on a massive scale, but also the chance to die trying. I need volunteers for this mission, Morrison said. I won't lie to you, it's dangerous. The facility is heavily defended, and the window for success is narrow. Hands shot up around the room. Thompson's was first, followed by a dozen others. Sarah raised her hand too, but she noticed Morrison's eyes skip right over her. Thank you for volunteering, the general said. I'll make my selections and brief the chosen pilots in 1 hour. As the room emptied, Sarah lingered, hoping for a chance to speak with Morrison privately, but he was already surrounded by senior officers, and she could see there was no point in waiting. Walking back to her quarters, Sarah felt the familiar sting of being overlooked. Once again, when it really mattered, she was being left on the sidelines. The boys' club was closing ranks for the most important mission of their careers, and there was no room for her inside. But Sarah Chen had not gotten this far by giving up easily. If they wouldn't choose her, she would have to find another way to prove her worth. The fate of the world might depend on it. An hour later, Sarah sat in her quarters, still waiting for a call that never came. Through her window, she could see the chosen pilots gathering on the flight line. Thompson was there, of course, along with the usual suspects or men, all part of the inner circle that had never included her. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. She opened it to find Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the general's nephew and one of the younger pilots on base. He looked nervous and kept glancing over his shoulder. Captain Chen, can I come in? I need to talk to you about something important. Sarah stepped aside to let him enter. Jake was a decent pilot and one of the few who had never openly mocked her, though he had never defended her either. What's on your mind, Lieutenant? Jake closed the door carefully behind him. It's about the mission, the one they just selected pilots for. What about it? I was chosen, Jake said quietly. But I can't do it, Captain. I just can't. Sarah studied his face. Jake was pale and his hands were shaking slightly. What do you mean you can't do it? My wife just had our first baby 3 weeks ago, Jake said, his voice breaking. A little girl named Emma. When I held her for the first time, I made a promise that I would always come home to her. He pulled out his phone and showed Sarah photos of a tiny baby wrapped in a pink blanket. This mission, everyone knows it's a one-way trip. The facility is too heavily defended. We might complete the objective, but we're not coming back. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, a suicide mission that explained the strange atmosphere in the briefing room and why Morrison had looked so grim. Lieutenant, you can't just back out of a mission, you'll face court-martial. I know, Jake said miserably, but I also know I can't leave Emma without a father. Not for this. Not when there might be another way. What other way? Jake looked directly at her for the first time since entering her quarters. You, Captain. Everyone knows you're the best pilot on this base, even if they won't admit it. Your scores in simulation are higher than anyone's, including Thompson's. If anyone could complete this mission and survive, it's you. Sarah felt her heart racing. What are you suggesting? Take my place, Jake whispered. The mission briefing isn't for another hour. I could say I'm sick, food poisoning or something. You could volunteer as a replacement, Jake. That's crazy, maybe, but it's also the right thing to do. You deserve this chance, Captain, and more importantly, the mission deserves the best pilot we have. Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the flight line again. The ground crews were loading weapons onto the F-16s, not the practice rounds they used in training, but real missiles with real warheads. In a few hours, those planes would be flying toward what might be the most important target in human history. If I do this, she said slowly, and if by some miracle I survive, my career is over. They'll never forgive me for taking your place without authorization. If you don't do this, Jake replied, there might not be any careers left to worry about. Captain, I've seen you fly in the simulators, in training exercises, even just practicing touch and you're not just good, you're extraordinary. You see things other pilots miss. You react faster, think clearer under pressure. Sarah turned back to face him. And what makes you think Morrison will accept a last-minute replacement because he's desperate? Jake said. This mission has to succeed, and deep down, he knows you're the best option. He just can't bring himself to admit it because of politics and old boy prejudices. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about her father's words again. When the moment comes, be ready. Maybe this was that moment, not handed to her on a silver platter, but offered through the courage of a young man who knew right from wrong. All right, she said finally. Let's do it. Jake's face flooded with relief. Thank you, Captain. I know this is asking a lot, Jake. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. Go home to your wife and daughter. Kiss that baby for me, and if anyone asks, you started feeling sick an hour ago. After Jake left, Sarah sat on her bed and tried to process what she had just agreed to do. In a few hours, she would be flying towards certain death for a chance to save millions of lives. It wasn't exactly how she had imagined proving herself, but it was the opportunity she had been waiting for her entire career. She spent the next hour going through her personal belongings, writing letters she hoped would never be delivered. One to her father, thanking him for his guidance, one to Lisa, apologizing for not being able to say goodbye in person, and one to be delivered to Jake's wife, telling her what a good man she had married. When the time came, Sarah walked to the briefing room with her helmet under her arm. The chosen pilots were already there, looking grim and determined. General Morrison was at the front, pointing to a detailed map of the target facility. Gentlemen, he was saying, this is a precision strike mission. We have one shot at this, and failure is not an option. That's when he noticed Sarah standing in the doorway. His face darkened immediately. Captain Chen, this is a closed briefing. Please, sir, Sarah interrupted, stepping into the room. Lieutenant Morrison has developed food poisoning and is unable to fly. I'm volunteering as his replacement. The room fell silent. Thompson snorted with derision. Oh, come on, General. We can't send her on this mission. It's too important. Morrison looked conflicted. Sarah could see him weighing his options. He needed every pilot he could get, but accepting her would mean admitting that she belonged in this room with the others. Captain Chen, Morrison said, slowly, this is not a routine mission. The stakes couldn't be higher. I understand, sir. That's exactly why you need your best pilots. Thompson stood up angrily. General, with all due respect, this is insane. We can't trust the fate of the world to what, Major? Sarah asked quietly. To a pilot with the highest simulation scores on the base. To someone who has never failed a mission evaluation. Or just to a woman. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison looked around the room at his pilot, then back at Sarah. She could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Finally, he made his decision. Captain Chen, take a seat. Let me brief you on the mission parameters. As Sarah sat down, she caught Thompson's furious glare. She knew she had just made an enemy for life, assuming she lived long enough for it to matter. But for the first time in her career, she was exactly where she belonged, preparing to fly the most important mission of her life. The briefing that followed would stay with her forever. The target was a hardened nuclear facility built into a mountainside. It was defended by the most advanced surface-to-air missile systems the Russians had, along with fighter patrols and radar networks that could track a bird at 50 miles. The plan was simple in concept but nearly impossible in execution, for F-16s would approach from different vectors, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to get close enough for a coordinated strike. They would have one chance to hit the facility's weak points with precision-guided munitions. Problem was the timing. The strike had to be perfect, with all 4 aircraft hitting their targets within seconds of each other. Any delay would give the defenders time to launch the nuclear weapons they were trying to destroy, and the intelligence reports made it clear. This was a one-way mission. The facility's defenses were too strong, and the approach routes too narrow, for any reasonable chance of escape. As the briefing ended, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. This was her moment, not the one she had imagined, but the one she had been given. She was going to fly into the face of death for a chance to save the world. It was exactly what she had trained her entire life to do. 4 hours later, Sarah sat in the cockpit of her F-16, running through her pre-flight checklist for the 3rd time. Her hands moved automatically over the familiar controls, but her mind was focused on the mission ahead. Around her, the other 3 aircraft were making their final preparations. The radio crackled in her helmet. Flight leader to all aircraft. Final comms check. Falcon 2, ready, came Thompson's voice, tight with tension. Falcon 3, ready, reported Captain Williams. Falcon 4, ready, Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the butterflies in her stomach. Roger, all flights. We are cleared for takeoff. Remember, radio silence once we cross the border. Good luck, everyone. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as her engines spooled up to full power. The F-16 rolled down the runway, and moments later she was airborne, climbing into the pre-dawn darkness. Below her, the lights of Las Vegas twinkled like scattered diamonds. But her thoughts were already hundreds of miles away. The flight to the target would take 3 hours, most of it at low altitude to avoid radar detection. Sarah settled into the rhythm of long-distance flying, constantly scanning her instruments and monitoring the tactical situation. On her radar screen, she could see the other 3 aircraft spread out in loose formation. As they crossed into international airspace, the reality of the mission began to sink in. This wasn't a training exercise or a show of force. In a few hours, she would be flying through the most dangerous airspace in the world, facing weapons designed specifically to kill aircraft like hers. The first sign of trouble came 2 hours into the flight. Sarah's radar warning receiver suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree, indicating multiple missile locks from surface-to-air missile sites ahead. Falcon Leader, this is Falcon 4, she transmitted quietly. I'm seeing multiple SAM sites active. They know we're coming. Copy 4. All flights, execute evasive plan Alpha. Drop to minimum altitude and maintain radio silence. Sarah pushed her stick forward, diving toward the mountainous terrain below. The G-forces pressed her into her seat as she leveled off just a few hundred feet above the ground, using the valleys and ridgelines to mask her approach. Flying this low at this speed required absolute concentration. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and she would become a crater in the mountainside. But Sarah had trained for this her entire career. Her hands were steady on the controls, her breathing calm and measured. The next hour passed in tense silence as the 4 aircraft threaded their way through the hostile territory. Sarah could see missile trails lighting up the sky around them as the enemy defenses tried to acquire targets. But the low altitude and terrain masking were working. So far. Then disaster struck. Sarah saw the explosion before she heard it, a brilliant flash of light off to her left, followed by burning debris falling from the sky. Falcon 3 had been hit by a surface-to-air missile. Captain Williams was gone. Falcon Leader to all flights, came the tight voice over the radio. Continue mission. We're almost to the target. Sarah felt a cold fury building in her chest. Williams had been a good man, a good pilot. He had left behind a wife and 2 young sons. His death would not be meaningless, she would make sure of that. The target facility appeared ahead, built into the side of a mountain and bristling with defensive positions. Sarah could see searchlights sweeping the sky and missile launchers tracking back and forth, hunting for intruders. All flights, this is Falcon Leader, beginning attack, run. Remember, we have 1 shot at this. Sarah banked her aircraft into position, lining up her targeting systems on the facility's main entrance. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were rock steady. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The first missiles launched from the facility just as Sarah rolled into her attack dive. The sky around her erupted in explosions and tracer fire as every defensive weapon in the area opened up simultaneously. She could see Thompson's aircraft off to her right, also diving toward the target. Falcon 4, you're taking fire, came Thompson's voice over the radio. Sarah could see the missile streaking toward her, its heat-seeking warhead locked onto her engine exhaust. She had maybe 3 seconds before impact. Without hesitation, she yanked her aircraft into a violent turn, pulling G-forces that made her vision gray at the edges. The missile flashed past her canopy, missing by mere feet, but the evasive maneuver had thrown off her attack run. She was no longer lined up on her target. In that split second, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Instead of aborting and trying again, she rolled her aircraft, inverted and dove straight down toward the facility's most heavily defended section, the nuclear storage bunker itself. Falcon 4, what are you doing? Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. That's not your target. Sarah didn't respond. She was too busy flying the most difficult approach of her career, threading her aircraft between missile trails and anti-fire while lining up on a target the size of a garage door. At the last possible second, she released her weapons and pulled up hard, the G-forces threatening to tear her aircraft apart. Behind her, she could hear the explosions as her precision-guided bombs found their mark. But she wasn't done yet. Even as her aircraft climbed away from the target, Sarah could see that the mission wasn't complete. The other pilots had hit their assigned targets, but the main nuclear storage facility was still intact. The bombs had damaged it but not destroyed it. The Russian general still had his weapons, and in a few hours, he would use them. Sarah keyed her radio one final time. All flights. This is Falcon 4. The primary target is still active. I'm going back in. Negative. 4, came the flight leader's voice. The mission is complete. Return to base immediately. But Sarah was already banking her aircraft around for another attack run. She had one missile left, a single weapon against the most heavily defended target she had ever seen. The odds of success were essentially zero, but the odds of survival were even worse. As she dove toward the facility for the second time, Sarah thought about her father's words one more time. When the moment comes, be ready. She had been ready her entire life for this moment, even if she hadn't known it. The defensive fire was even heavier this time. The sky filled with explosions and burning metal. Sarah's aircraft shook from near misses, and warning lights flashed across her instrument panel. But she held her course, boring in toward the target like an arrow, aimed at the heart of nuclear war. At 500 feet above the facility, Sarah made her final decision. Instead of releasing her last missile and pulling away, she aimed her aircraft directly at the nuclear storage bunker and pushed the throttles to full power. She was going to ram the target, using her entire aircraft as a guided missile. It was the only way to ensure the facility was completely destroyed. In the last seconds before impact, Sarah thought about Thompson and the others who had doubted her. They would never doubt her again. She had proven herself in the most final way possible by sacrificing everything to save the world. The last thing she remembered was a brilliant white light, and then nothing at all. Sarah woke up to the sound of voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Her head felt like it had been split open with an axe, and every part of her body ached. When she tried to open her eyes, the light was so bright it felt like needles stabbing into her brain. Gradually, her vision cleared enough to see that she was lying on a cot in what appeared to be a small medical facility. The walls were rough, stone, and the air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something burned. A man in a white coat was checking her pulse. He had kind eyes and spoke to her in accented English. "Ah, you are awake. This is very good. We were not sure you would survive. Where am I?" Sarah's voice came out as a croak. "You are in a field hospital, about 20 kilometers from where we found you. I am Dr. Petrov. I have been taking care of you for the past 3 days. 3 days. Sarah tried to sit up, but the room spun violently and she fell back onto the cat. "The mission, did we?" Dr. Petrov smiled sadly. "The facility was destroyed. Your mission was successful, but the cost was very high. The other pilots, I am sorry, you were the only survivor we found. The others," he shook his head. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a wave of grief wash over her. Thompson, Williams, the flight leader, all dead. Men who had families, dreams, futures, all gone while she somehow survived. "How?" she whispered. "How did I survive?" Dr. Petrov pulled up a chair beside her cot. "According to the soldiers who found you, your aircraft hit the facility at very high speed, but you ejected at the last possible moment. Your parachute barely had time to open before you hit the ground." Sarah tried to remember those final moments, but everything after the decision to ram the target was a blank. Her body had acted on pure instinct, ejecting when her conscious mind had already accepted death. "The explosion from your aircraft destroyed the nuclear storage bunker completely," Dr. Petrov continued. "The Russian general surrendered 2 hours later when he realized he had no more weapons. He stopped a nuclear war captain." Over the next few days, as Sarah slowly recovered from her injuries, she learned more about what had happened. The mission had been front-page news around the world. The other 3 pilots were being hailed as heroes who had died saving millions of lives, but there was no mention of her anywhere. According to the official reports, Lieutenant Jake Morrison had been the 4th pilot on the mission, not her. Military had decided that acknowledging her unauthorized participation would create too many complications. It was easier to pretend she had never been there at all. Dr. Petrov, who turned out to be a refugee doctor working with international relief organizations, had been caring for her in secret. The local military commander, a reasonable man named Colonel Vasquez, had agreed to keep her presence quiet until she was well enough to decide what to do next. "They will not welcome you back," Dr. Petrov said bluntly during one of their conversations. "You disobeyed orders, took another man's place without authorization. Even though you saved the world, they will court-martial you." Sarah stared at the ceiling of the small medical facility. She had given everything for her country, her career, her fellow pilots. She had literally prevented nuclear war, and her reward was to be erased from history and face military prison. "What would you do?" Dr. Petrov was quiet for a long moment. "I think," he said finally, "that sometimes the system is too broken to fix from the inside. Sometimes you have to find another way to serve. It took Sarah 2 more weeks to fully recover from her injuries. During that time, she had a lot of opportunity to think about her future. She could return to the United States and face whatever consequences awaited her. She could disappear entirely, start a new life somewhere far away from the military and its prejudices, or she could find a third option. The answer came to her when Dr. Petrov mentioned that several international relief organizations were looking for pilots to help with humanitarian missions in conflict zones. These organizations didn't care about military politics or old boy networks. They cared about results. I want to help, Sarah told him. But first, I need to do something. She spent her last night at the medical facility writing a detailed account of everything that had happened, the mission, the discrimination she had faced, and the cover-up that followed. She documented Thompson's harassment, Morrison's reluctance to include her, and the military's decision to erase her from history. When she was finished, she sealed the account in an envelope and gave it to Dr. Pett. What do you want me to do with this? He asked. Hold on to it, Sarah said. Someday, when the time is right, the world needs to know the truth. The next morning, Sarah said goodbye to the doctor who had saved her life and boarded a transport plane heading to Africa. She was about to begin a new chapter, flying medical supplies to refugee camps and providing air support for peacekeeping missions. It wasn't the career she had planned, but it was the one she had chosen, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free. Back at Nellis Air Force Base, Major Rick Thompson was being promoted to lieutenant colonel for his heroic actions during the mission. He stood at attention as General Morrison pinned the new rank insignia on his uniform, basking in the applause of his fellow officers. None of them mentioned Captain Sarah Chen, who was officially listed as having been on medical leave during the mission. Her quarters had been cleared out, her belongings shipped to her father, and her name quietly removed from the active duty roster. As far as the Air Force was concerned, she had never existed, but Thompson knew the truth. He had seen her aircraft make that final attack run, had watched her sacrifice everything to complete the mission. Late at night, when he was alone with his thoughts, he was haunted by the memory of her courage. He had spent years mocking her, undermining her, questioning her abilities, and when the moment of ultimate test came, she had proven herself in a way that he never could. The promotion felt hollow in his hands, a decoration built on a lie. He was being celebrated for a mission that he couldn't have completed without the woman he had spent years trying to destroy. Thompson returned to his quarters that night and stared at himself in the mirror. The man looking back at him was wearing the uniform of a hero, but he knew the truth about what lay underneath. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Sarah Chen was piloting a cargo plane full of medical supplies toward a refugee camp in Sudan. She wore no uniform, carried no rank, and received no recognition for her service. But as she watched the sun rise over the African landscape, she felt something she had never experienced in all her years in the Air Force. Peace. She had found her true calling at last, and someday the world would know what she had sacrificed to save it. 2 years later, Sarah was loading medical supplies onto her cargo plane at a small airfield in South Sudan when her satellite phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Communication with the outside world was sporadic at best in this remote corner of Africa. "This is Sarah," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead in the blazing heat. "Captain Chen, this is Jake Morrison." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. She hadn't heard that voice since the morning he had come to her quarters at Nellis, asking her to take his place on the mission that changed everything. "Jake, how did you find me?" "It wasn't easy." Jake's voice was tight with emotion. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that's been eating me alive for 2 years." Sarah sat down on a crate of medical supplies, suddenly feeling very tired. "What is it?" "They gave me a medal," Jake said quietly. "The Distinguished Flying Cross. For the mission you flew. They had a ceremony, made speeches about my heroism and sacrifice. The whole time I wanted to stand up and tell them the truth, but I was scared. Scared of losing my career, scared of what would happen to my family." Sarah closed her eyes. She had wondered what story they had told, how they had explained Jake's miraculous survival from a suicide mission. But yesterday, Jake continued, something happened that changed everything. Thompson was drunk at the officers' club, bragging about the mission. He started talking about how you were really there, how you were the one who made the final attack run. He was laughing about it, saying how funny it was that a woman saved the world but nobody would ever know. Sarah felt her jaw clench. Even 2 years later, Thompson was still the same small-minded bully he had always been. Other people heard him. "Sarah, word is starting to get around the base. People are asking questions about what really happened that day." "Jake, why are you telling me this?" Because I can't live with this lie anymore. I've been promoted twice, based on a mission I never flew. I have a house, a car, college funds set up for MAL built on your sacrifice. It's killing me, Sarah. I have to make this right. Sarah stood up and walked to the edge of the airfield, looking out at the vast African landscape. In the distance she could see dust clouds from a convoy of trucks, bringing more refugees to the camp. People who had lost everything, who depended on her and others like her for their very survival. What do you want me to do, Jake? Come back. Help me tell the truth. You're still officially a well, but I have friends in high places now. People who owe me favors. I think I can protect you from the worst of it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. The life she had built here was hard, but meaningful. She flew medicine to people who desperately needed it, evacuated the wounded, and helped coordinate relief efforts across multiple countries. She had saved more lives in the past 2 years than she ever could have as an Air Force pilot. But Jake was right about one thing: the truth mattered. Sarah, are you still there? I'm here, Jake. I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who took your place on that mission. I've changed. The military, the politics, the games, done with all of that, I know, but this isn't about the military. This is about history, about making sure the real heroes get remembered. Sarah made her decision. All right, I'll come back. But not to rejoin the Air Force. I'm coming back to set the record straight, and then I'm returning here. This is my life now. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen walked into the Pentagon wearing civilian clothes and carrying a battered briefcase. She had asked Dr. Petrov to send her the envelope she had left with him 2 years earlier, and it had arrived just in time. The meeting had been arranged through Jake's connections, and Sarah found herself sitting across from a room full of Air Force brass, including General Morrison and several people she didn't recognize. Thompson was notably absent. General Morrison looked uncomfortable as he began the meeting. Captain Chun, or rather, Ms. Chun, I understand you have some concerns about the official record of Operation Desert Shield. Desert Shield. Sarah almost laughed. Is that what you're calling it now? That's the name of a completely different operation from 30 years ago. One of the men she didn't recognize leaned forward. Ms. Chen, we're prepared to offer you full reinstatement with back pay, promotion to major, and a clean record if you're willing to let sleeping dogs lie. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Gentlemen, I think you misunderstand why I'm here. I'm not looking for favors or career advancement. I'm here to tell the truth. She placed the folder on the table and pushed it toward them. That contains a complete account of what really happened 2 years ago. The discrimination I faced, the unauthorized mission substitution, and the cover-up that followed. I also have signed statements from Lieutenant Morrison acknowledging his role, and testimony from several witnesses who heard Major Thompson discussing the real events. General Morrison's face went pale as he opened the folder and began reading. Ms. Chen, surely we can work something out. Your service record shows my service record shows exactly what you wanted it to show. Sarah interrupted. Nothing, as far